The objective of IronReign is to take over 3 castles on the game board, completely enclosed, or to prevent your opponent from maintaining 1 castle completely enclosed. Game components include cards, wall pieces, holes and fireball markers, troops, ships and siege weapons, cannons, a bag that contains buildings, dice, and the first player marker. In the beginning of the game, set aside the 4 blank IronReign cards, shuffle the remaining deck and put them in the draw cards section of the board. Also, draw out 4 occupation discs and put them in the occupation discs section of the board. A 2-player game begins with both players rolling the die. The highest number gets the starting player token and chooses one of the following 6 cities to start: Grove, Apex, Quash, or on the other side, Resend, Zenith, or Arbor. The first player places his capital token on top of the city that he's chosen. This should cover 4 squares on the board. His opponent then chooses a city 3 regions away. In this case, the only acceptable regions are Arbor or Resend at the top. Both players then take 3 long pieces and 2 L-shaped pieces to build their castles. The 3 acceptable shapes when building the initial castle is the square, the rectangle, and the long rectangle. Next, players place 2 square cannons on top of their walls, using the black dots to identify spaces. Each turn is comprised of 6 phases. The first player will play 1 phase, then the next player will play the phase, until all phases are complete. Upkeep phase is skipped on the first turn. Purchase phase begins with players identifying how much spending power they have. Players that maintain their original capital stronghold have a buying power of 10 points. Players that have expanded out and taken over additional strongholds receive 5 points for each additional stronghold. In this example, the stronghold has not been maintained because there is a diagonal opening to the outside world in the top right corner. In this example, the stronghold has not been maintained because there is a hole in the wall. In this example, the stronghold has not been maintained because there is a fireball on the wall. Items that can be purchased are ships, cannons, buildings or occupation discs, cards, soldiers, or repairing holes in your wall. Cards are important because they represent wall pieces that can be placed in the game to either expand your kingdom out or to fix holes in your wall. Buildings are modifiers that benefit the players in different phases of the game. Soldiers move across the battlefield and can get in the way of other units, as well as be converted into siege weapons to damage walls. Cannons and ships both have the ability to damage other players' walls. This player decides to purchase 3 cards at 2 points each and 1 occupation disc for 4 points. This equals 10 points. All newly purchased items are held on that player's side until they can be deployed later in the game. The maximum number of cards a player can hold is 4, unless modified by an occupation disc. If a player does not spend all spendable points in a turn, they can keep change in the bank located on the board. In this example, the player purchased 2 cards at 2 points apiece and 1 cannon for 5 points. The total is 9 points, which gives the player 1 additional spending point they can save in the bank. Save points are identified by placing single wall tiles in the bank area on the board. These can then be spent on the next purchase phase. The following pieces can be moved in move phase. Troops can move 10 spaces, siege weapons can move 4, ships 15, and to move a cannon, a card must be discarded and the cannon can move the number of spaces indicated on the bottom of the card. Soldiers may move up to 10 spaces per turn. They cannot move diagonal, and they cannot land on the following spaces: spaces that contain buildings, capitals, or wall spaces. Siege weapons attack on move phase. Siege weapons can move through or land on spaces that contain soldiers, buildings, or walls. If a siege weapon moves through or lands on a space that contains either a troop or a building, those pieces are immediately removed from the game. If a siege weapon moves through or lands on a wall space, put hole markers in the spaces that the siege weapon moved onto. Ships are the only items that can move through water spaces.
Coastal spaces have both land and water on them. Any unit can land on or move through coastal spaces.
Units cannot share the same space on board. If a soldier ends its movement on a town space, the enemy of that soldier can still surround the town to make a courtyard, but they do not receive any points for that town until the soldier is destroyed. A soldier that ends its movement adjacent to an enemy's wall cannot be targeted by cannon fire. If a soldier is completely surrounded by enemy wall pieces, it is destroyed. The only way to make siege weapons in the game is to convert troops into siege weapons. The following must be present in order to create siege weapons. The player must own a workshop. The player must also own a soldier. Siege weapons are created in move phase of the game. The soldier must sacrifice his move to become a siege weapon. Remove the soldier and replace it with a siege weapon token. Cannons may be moved along any owned wall space. Remember to place a card to use this capability. Cannons must remain on wall spaces and cannot move over gaps.